I just interviewed a man who murdered his entire family. The motive is absolutely haunting. It was the worst crime scene I'd ever laid eyes on. It wasn't the bodies, the blood, or shattered bone. It was the Christmas decorations. Streaks of shimmering tinsel and quaint little holiday knickknacks that were splattered with gore. All the hallmarks of a happy, healthy family were rendered a grotesque, dissonant joke. The bodies of a woman and 3 young children were laid out on the kitchen floor, small pebbles placed over their lifeless eyes. The woman had been killed by a single shotgun blast to her torso. The children had been bludgeoned to death. There was no sign of the man of the house, and I dreaded having to give him the news. Only, we didn't have to. Neither did we have to wait long for a suspect. The news spread like wildfire around our department. A man had handed himself into the police after having made a full and frank confession to the murders. But it wasn't some crazed killer, some escaped lunatic or gun-obsessed loner. The murderer was the woman's husband, the 3 murdered children's father. I was tasked with the interview. It was down to me to find out what could possibly drive a man to murder his family in cold blood. As I sat down in the interview room, the man across from me seemed totally disconnected, numb to the crimes he'd been so quick to admit to. It took an hour to finally get him to talk. He'd murdered his children first, then placed the stones over their eyes so they wouldn't have to see him kill their mother. He said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done, that it had taken months for him to work up the courage to finally do the deed. When I asked him if he regretted it, he smiled.
No, I'd do it all again in a heartbeat.
But no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't work out the motive. We pressed him and pressed him, but still, he'd just smile and shake his head. Do you think we won't understand? I remember asking him, trying a different angle of approach. Because you'd be surprised. Was she cheating on you? Was she about to leave and take the kids? Again, he smiled and shook his head.
She'd never do that. She was a good woman. Perfect, even.
Then why did you kill her? What could make you hate so much that you'd murder your entire family?
It's not that you won't understand, sir.
He murmured, that smile still on his lips, and he refused to make eye contact.
It's that I know you will. I know you'll understand exactly why I did what I did, and I don't want to inflict that on you.
I leaned over the interview table, unable to contain my contempt for him. Try me. He finally looked up and made eye contact, and it's then I saw it. Not madness in his eyes, not hatred. It was clarity, pure lucidity.
I have cancer,
he said.
Doc says I have a month left at best.
Then why kill them? Why not make the most of the time you have left with them?
Because,
he said,
I couldn't be alone. I couldn't wait for them in heaven all on my own. So instead, they're waiting for me.
Don't look in the mirrors. Just trust me. Don't look. It's not really something you think about. Maybe it's while brushing your teeth, maybe fixing your hair. Maybe you want to see how nice you look in that new shirt. But one of those times something might look wrong, feel wrong. A hair out of place, a slight change in eye color. But when you get close enough to see what it is, you're close enough for them to reach you. There won't be any pain. There won't be any sound. You won't even get a chance to scream. You'll get pulled through, and then that's it. All you can do now is look through the mirror. All the time. Every day. And all you'll be able to see is the thing that took your place. It'll wink at you. And all you'll be able to do is wink back. Don't look in the mirrors. Wallmate. Keep your voice down.
Keep your voice down.
Don't yell. The walls are too thin. He might hear you. He might wake up. In fact, he might be up right now.
Right now.
So, please, don't yell.
Don't yell.
He sleeps in the walls. Right there. Right there. Near my bed. And near the vent.
Near the vent.
And if the man wakes up, then he'll snake his arms out. It can slip through the grates. It's thin enough.
It's thin enough.
Wiggly enough.
Wiggly enough.
Your neck is thin enough too.
Your
neck. He can wrap his fingers around it. Wouldn't take much strength. Not much at all. To break it. Just one squeeze. One squeeze. You wouldn't even be able to scream. To scream. Your breath will be taken away. And the noise would stop. So, don't yell. Don't ask questions. And be quiet. We need to talk about the kid. Mom speaks to Dad. Billy is sitting between his father and mother, thinking that it's unusual for Mom to talk in such a monotonous tone. He doesn't say a word because he has learnt over the years that it is not a wise choice to talk when Mom and Dad are talking. In fact, not to talk at all is the only wise choice for Billy in this household. What? Dad expresses his lack of patience in just one word. Dad is always good at expressing anger, sometimes by words and sometimes by fists, seasoned with a belt whip or two. And occasionally by a pair of Oxfords if Dad miraculously gets a job interview that day. Billy thinks to himself, almost bursts out into laughter. It's an unusual sense of humor for a 16-year-old boy to have, but Billy's life is never usual, and he has also been through a lot more than a 16-year-old should have. Don't what me? If you had spent more time with the kid, I wouldn't have been called to the principal's room again. Oh. So it's my fault now that the kid is running around school breaking stuff, hurting other students. Dad's voice is getting louder with every word. Billy wants to tell them his name is Billy and not the kid. but he restrains this urge to avoid the beating he will get if he opens his mouth. He forgets he won't be beaten again. Not anymore. Of course it's your fault. I'm always the one that puts food on the table. What have you done for this family? Normally, Dad will fire back with another insult, then begin to beat up Mom. Just another Wednesday night in Billy's home. But that is not happening, because Billy is bored of role-playing now. He withdraws his hands from his parents' cold lips. His thumbs are sore from arching up and down, constantly trying to make their mouths move. Billy rests his back against the chair and gazes at what is in front of him, as if he is looking at the greatest piece of art he has ever seen. His parents lie in their chairs, arms draping like broken branches toward the ground. There are little streams of dried blood on Dad's left arm. They come from the gash on his throat cut open earlier with a steak knife by Billy. Mom doesn't have much blood on her body because the fork is still buried deep inside her neck. For the first time in his life, Billy feels relieved. He feels free. He decides to do something only grown-ups are allowed to do in this house. He laughs. Getting fired. The living always think death is the end, the cessation of responsibility, stress, and work. They couldn't be further from the truth. I guess I have a modest job for a dead guy. I'm not sure if it's punishment or reward for how I lived, it's just my job. I'm not sure what happens if I fail. I've been led to believe that it will redefine terror. My job is simple, making the living's life more difficult. Not all of them, just ones I'm assigned. I've been told the purpose is that life isn't enriching when things are too easy or some other idealistic mission statement crap like that. Most of what I do is straightforward, deleting files right before the work is complete, draining batteries in cars and devices. Just simple, frustrating things to cause challenge in their peaceful existence. Occasionally, I'll get tasked with a big one. Cancer or car accident is usually my go-to in these cases. It was a simple job until I was assigned Isabel. I threw everything I could at disrupting this optimistic, perky, always smiling, skipping through the challenges woman. Nothing, and I mean nothing, throws her off her blind optimism. And it's making me sick. I've taken her family, friends, given her strange diseases every time she meets it with a smile and confidence. I'm not sure what happens if I fail, but I'm afraid I'm going to find out. Usually I can't see everything my target does. I'm assigned multiple people at a time. This one is personal now. Isabel must be made to falter. I've been slowly influencing her life in a positive direction, thinking that she's positive because things never were great for her. Therefore, loss has no impact. I used every resource from romance stories I can think of, setting this up over months. She's deeply in love. It quickly became her world. I've used more positive influence than I am permitted to get them here. A romantic holiday in a secluded getaway. Dinner for two, cushions set in front of a crackling fire, cuddling and exploring their love. It couldn't be more perfect. Her eyes are sparkling, locked with his. I've never seen love this intense in the eyes. She's unaware that I've chosen him due to his heart defect. One flick of my finger through his chest and boom. This will devastate her. I focus on patience, nervously pacing the room. I must let the passion build to a peak before I take him. I'm already on thin ice. From the corner of my eye, movement, a glint, something shiny. I turn quickly, rushing to them. It's too late. Isabel plunged the knife directly through his heart. Staring deeply into his eyes, watching the last bit of his life drain. She's so damn insanely happy. I scramble to come up with a plan or explanation. I can see myself dissolving already. I'm not sure what will happen because I failed. But I'm terrified. Elf on the Shelf. Grandma would always warn me that the elf on the shelf was watching to make sure I wasn't bad. Growing up, even when it was nowhere near Christmas, the elf would observe me. The elf would judge me. With my brother and cousins around all the time, it wasn't easy to be good. But I tried. I tried really hard. When I'd make a mistake and be mean to one of them, I felt the elf staring at me. It would remember that moment. I'd picture it waiting until I was in bed, then running and tattling to Santa. No matter how much I screamed and sobbed to it, the elf wouldn't answer. It would just watch and wait for me to do something bad again. It knew me too well. On the 4th of July, I burned Marissa with a sparkler. I didn't do it on purpose. I meant to burn Marissa, but I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted to see what would happen. Unfortunately, she got hurt pretty bad. Grandma had to take her to the hospital, but not before she got out the belt and whipped me until I couldn't sit down. After Marissa's mom came over to give me a beating of her own, I was left watching Neil, my little brother. Grandma was still at the hospital. Neil watched TV while I tried to walk off the pain from the beatings. Before Dad died, that's what he'd tell me to do.
Walk it off, you little faggot.
I walked a lot. When I got to the living room, the elf was watching me. It knew. Its wooden mouth was open, almost like it was screaming accusations. You're a bad kid. No one likes you. Santa thinks you're terrible. You'll be a bad man when you grow up. It didn't actually speak, of course, but it was obvious that's what it meant. It was the same stuff Grandma said to me, day in, day out. And somehow, I always made sure to live up to it. Try as I might, I couldn't be good. At the age of 8, I was already certain I was rotten to the core. Months went by, and my best efforts yielded punishment. If I wasn't accidentally knocking over a vase in the kitchen, I was tracking mud into the hallway. It invariably ended up with my pants around my ankles and my grandfather's old leather belt smashing into me as I tried not to scream. Screaming would only make the beatings last longer. When it was finally over and I inched my jeans and underwear back up, I told myself I'd be better, that I'd be a good kid from here on out. And for a while, for the entire month of November and into December, I was. Grandma, Neil, and I went to get our Christmas tree on December 4th. We came home and decorated it while cookies baked in the oven.
I remember Grandma lifting me with her strong, solid arms so I could put the star on top. The star had been her daughter's, my mother's. It was one of the only things left that had belonged to her. On December 5th, after Neil and I had gotten home from school, we were playing around. Like all brothers, we played rough. With him being 6 and me being 8, I was quite a bit bigger. When we were wrestling and I was spinning him by his arm, I made a mistake. I let him go and sent him right into the Christmas tree. It fell onto the hardwood floor. Ornaments broke. Lights went out. The star shattered. In an instant, I was panicking. I knew Neil would tell Grandma. I knew the elf in the other room would learn what I'd done. I'd been good for so long that I'd started hoping I might get Christmas presents. After this, though, after breaking the one thing Grandma had left after her daughter was killed by Dad, I'd be doomed. Grandma would beat me senseless. The elf would tell Santa I'd get nothing, and Neil would taunt me with his presence. Something sparked inside me. What if the elf hadn't seen what happened? What if Neil didn't tell Grandma? I was very busy for about an hour. By the time I was done, Grandma would be back from work any minute. I knew I might not fool her, but I'd fool the elf. That was most important. It was he who talked to Santa, not Grandma. I wore Neil's face into the living room and looked at the elf on the shelf. He stared back with his black, judgmental eyes. "I'm sorry I knocked over the tree and broke the ornament," I said, doing my best impression of Neil's high voice. I thought about his body cooling on the kitchen floor and his blood making a mess everywhere. Maybe Grandma would believe he fell on a knife if I cried hard enough. Under the mask of my brother's skin, I peered at the elf through the eye holes. The skin tasted awful, but I had to breathe through my mouth because the nose holes didn't line up right. I wondered if the elf believed me. "I'm sorry, elf," I squeaked again. I heard the garage door rising and a car pulling inside. Grandma was home. I felt a new rush of panic. I glared through the cold mask at the arbiter of my Christmas fortune. The door connecting the garage to the kitchen opened, and I heard my grandmother's shrill, hysterical shriek. "Elf," I whispered as tears mixed with my brother's blood and cascaded down my face. The elf on the shelf turned its head 360 degrees as its mouth opened and closed. When it faced me again, it spoke. "You've been very bad, Neil." I fell to my knees in fervid, incomprehensible relief. Some part of me heard Grandma still screaming, somehow even louder when she came into the room and saw me. Again, the elf spoke. "You've been terrible, Neil." Grandma whirled around and looked at the elf, but then shook her head back and forth like she was trying to get a hold of herself. I stood up, not wanting to ruin the illusion for the elf. I held the mask to my face until I left the room and sat down in the kitchen. Grandma didn't try to hit me. She didn't touch me at all. I piled the skin back on Neil's head and told Grandma he fell. She didn't answer. It didn't matter, though. 20 days later, in my own warm room at the hospital, I got some very nice Christmas presents. The doctors and nurses were so kind and gentle with me. One even hugged me after I'd opened my gifts. The gifts weren't exactly what I'd hoped for, but they were better than nothing. So much better. I giggled to myself as we hugged. When the nurse asked what I was laughing at, I lied and told her I remembered a funny joke.
She smiled, and I was surprised to see a tear running down her cheek. I didn't think much of it, though. All that mattered was I'd won. I'd finally fooled the elf on the shelf.